The University of Michigan's Harlan Library hired me for the night shift, with 3 times the normal pay and one strange requirement: never enter the restricted languages section after midnight. The day librarian, Mrs. Foster, handed me a laminated card with additional rules. If you hear whispering from that section, don't listen. If books appear on your desk that you didn't retrieve, don't open them. And if you find yourself reading aloud in a language you don't recognize, stop immediately and leave the building. I thought academia had finally driven her mad until my 3rd night, when I heard hundreds of voices reciting in perfect unison from behind the locked doors of the restricted languages section, in languages that predated human speech. My name is Robert Chen, and I was desperate when I took the job. 3 months of unemployment had drained my savings, my dissertation was stalled, and my ex-wife's lawyer was demanding payments I couldn't make. The Harlan Library position seemed like salvation. $60 an hour for sitting in a quiet building, checking in books, and maybe getting some of my own research done. The interview had been odd, focusing more on what I couldn't do than what I could. Could I read ancient Greek? Number? Sanskrit? Not a word. Sumerian or Akkadian? I couldn't even identify them. Perfect, the hiring committee had said in unison, which should have been my first warning. Mrs. Foster met me on a humid Monday evening in September. The library closed to the public at 10 p.m., giving us an hour for orientation before my first shift officially began. She was a woman in her 60s, with steel gray hair pulled back so tightly it stretched her features into a permanent expression of mild alarm. Her eyes had an unsettling quality I couldn't quite identify at first. They never seemed to focus on what she was looking at, as if she was constantly seeing something just beyond the physical world. "Mr. Chen," she began, her voice carrying the kind of forced calm that suggested she was reading from a mental script. "The Harlan Library houses over 3 million volumes across 5 floors. Your duties are straightforward: circulation desk management, hourly security rounds, basic cleaning, and absolutely no interaction with the restricted languages section after midnight." She led me through the building systematically. The first floor was mundane enough. The main circulation desk where I'd spend most of my time, computer labs that hummed with electricity, study rooms with glass walls, and the popular reading section full of bestsellers and magazines. The fluorescent lights gave everything a sterile, hospital-like quality that I found oddly comforting. The second floor housed periodicals and reference materials, row after row of bound journals and encyclopedias that probably hadn't been touched in years now that everything was digital. Dust motes danced in the air, and the silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. The third floor was special collections, first editions behind glass cases, manuscripts in climate-controlled rooms, architectural drawings in flat files that probably cost more than my car. Mrs. Foster moved through this floor quickly, as if she didn't like lingering there. "The 4th floor," she said as we climbed the stairs, "is where things become complicated." The moment we reached the 4th floor, the atmosphere changed. The air felt heavier, charged with static electricity that made my skin prickle and my hair stand on end. The hallway was narrower here, the ceiling lower, and the lighting was different. Older fixtures that cast yellow pools of light with dark spaces between them. At the far end of the hallway stood a door that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It was made of oak so old it looked black, reinforced with iron bands that had rust stains bleeding down like tears. The door was covered in brass plaques, each one inscribed with text in different scripts. Some I recognized as Arabic or Hebrew. Others were completely alien to me. The largest plaque, centered at eye level, read, "Restricted languages, authorized personnel only, no entry, 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. This, Mrs. Foster said, stopping a good 10 feet from the door, as if afraid to get closer, is the restricted languages section. It contains texts dating back over 4,000 years, written in languages that predate modern human civilization. Your keycard will open it during daylight hours for basic maintenance, checking climate controls, ensuring the preservation systems are working. After midnight, the lock engages automatically and won't release until dawn." "Why midnight specifically?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but feeling a chill run down my spine. Mrs. Foster turned to look at me, and for the first time, her unfocused eyes seemed to see me clearly. "Because that's when they wake up." She handed me the laminated card before I could ask what she meant. The rules were printed in bold black text. 1. Never enter the restricted languages section after midnight. 2. If you hear whispering from that section, don't listen. 3. If books appear on your desk that you didn't retrieve, don't open them. 4. If you find yourself reading aloud in a language you don't recognize, stop immediately and leave the building. 5. Do not attempt to translate anything you don't understand. 6. If the lights in the restricted section turn on by themselves, leave the building. 7. Never look directly at the books that read themselves. 8. If you see someone in the restricted section after midnight, do not acknowledge them. 9. Books that bleed should be reported, but not touched. 10. If your name appears in a text you've never seen before, do not read the surrounding passage. Books that read themselves. I asked, trying to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Books that bleed? Mrs. Foster pulled out her phone and showed me a video. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m., dated 2 weeks ago. It showed the interior of the restricted section, row after row of ancient shelves stretching back into shadows, filled with volumes that looked older than civilization. The image was grainy, filmed in the green tint of night vision cameras. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, books began to glow. Not all of them, just certain volumes scattered throughout the collection. The glow was soft, pulsing like a heartbeat. One by one, these books opened themselves, pages turning without any visible force. And then I heard it through the phone's speaker. Voices, hundreds of them speaking in perfect unison, but in languages that sounded wrong somehow, as if human throats weren't meant to make those sounds. "This is from the incident with Mr. Vance," Mrs. Foster said. "Our previous night librarian. He lasted 6 weeks, which was actually quite impressive. Most don't make it past the first month." On the screen, a figure appeared between the shelves, a middle-aged man in a security uniform, walking slowly toward one of the glowing books. He leaned in to look at the pages, and the moment his eyes focused on the text, his body went rigid. His mouth opened, and the same inhuman sounds that came from the books began pouring from his throat. The video cut off. "Where is Mr. Vance now?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. "University Hospital, psychiatric ward. He speaks only in dead languages now. Not just dead, but languages that linguists insist never existed. He writes constantly, filling notebook after notebook with symbols that hurt to look at. The few fragments that professors have tried to translate describe impossible things, cities with geometry that can't exist in 3 dimensions, historical events that never happened but are documented in perfect detail, and..." She paused, seeming to consider whether to continue. "And what? Prophecies. Detailed accounts of events that haven't happened yet. Some have come true. Small things mostly. A specific student dropping out, a particular book being donated to the library, a professor dying in a car accident. All written weeks before they occurred, in languages that shouldn't exist." I wanted to laugh, to dismiss this as an elaborate hazing ritual for the new employee, but Mrs. Foster's expression was deadly serious, and the video evidence was hard to dispute. "Why doesn't the university just remove the collection?" I asked, "or seal it permanently?" "They've tried." She walked to a window that overlooked the campus, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "In 1987, they attempted to move the collection to a secure facility. The 3 workers sent to pack the books were found the next morning speaking in tongues, the same tongues the books speak. The books themselves had returned to their original positions on the shelves, despite being photographed in boxes the night before." She turned back to me. "In 1994, they tried to seal the room permanently. Construction workers reported that the walls bled actual blood when they tried to install a barrier. The blood was tested. It was human, but it matched no one in any database. It was also over 2,000 years old, yet still fresh. That's impossible." "Yes," she agreed simply. "It is, and yet here we are." The university decided that containing the collection was safer than trying to remove it. As long as someone stands guard, as long as the rules are followed, the books remain mostly dormant. She led me back downstairs to the circulation desk, showing me the mundane aspects of the job. The computer system was straightforward, the security procedures simple, the cleaning supplies well organized. But my mind kept returning to that video, to the image of books opening themselves in the dark. "Your primary job," Mrs. Foster said, pulling out an old leather journal from behind the desk, "is to be a witness, to ensure the books remain contained. If anything unusual happens, you log it here." She opened the journal, showing me entries dating back decades, different handwriting but similar reports. Voices at 1:47 a.m., books displaced but accounted for. Writing appeared on desk, did not read as instructed. "This belonged to Dr. Marcus Webb," she continued, "head librarian from 1952 to 1967. He was the first to understand what we're really dealing with. He wrote extensively about the nature of the collection before his departure." I flipped through the pages, reading fragments of Webb's observations. The texts are not merely books, but vessels. Each contains fragments of something older than human civilization, entities that exist primarily as living language. They were trapped in written form by ancient priests who understood that some knowledge is too dangerous to speak aloud. The entities have learned to read themselves, to speak through the texts even while imprisoned within them. They seek translators, humans who can bridge the gap between their realm of pure meaning and our physical world. Once you understand them, you become part of them. Once you read their true language, you can never unread it. My first night officially began at 11 p.m. Mrs. Foster left with a final warning. The books will test you. They'll try to communicate, to seduce you with knowledge. They'll appear on your desk, whisper secrets you want to know, show you visions of the past and future. Resist. Your ignorance is your armor. The moment you understand them is the moment you belong to them. The first 2 hours were surprisingly normal. A few graduate students worked in the 24-hour study room on the first floor, typing away at laptops, surrounded by coffee cups and energy drink cans. I did my rounds, checking that doors were locked, turning off lights in unused areas, making sure windows were secured. The building felt like any other library at night, quiet, peaceful, maybe a little creepy, but nothing supernatural. At 11:45 p.m., I made an announcement that the study room would close in 15 minutes. The students packed up without complaint, used to the routine. By midnight, I was alone in a building containing 3 million books, and apparently some number of entities that existed as living language. For the first hour after midnight, nothing happened. I sat at the circulation desk, working on my own research, occasionally glancing up at the ceiling, as if I could see through to the fourth floor. The building was silent except for the hum of computers and the occasional creak of settling wood. At 1:17 a.m., I heard the first whisper. It came from above, definitely from the fourth floor. Not loud enough to make out words, just a soft murmuring like wind through leaves or water over stones. I tried to ignore it, putting on headphones and playing music, but the whispers somehow came through the music, weaving themselves into the melody, turning song lyrics into words I didn't recognize, but almost understood. At 1:45 a.m., a book appeared on my desk. I hadn't seen it arrive. One moment the desk was clear, except for my laptop and coffee mug. The next moment, a leather-bound volume sat beside my keyboard. It was ancient, the cover worn smooth by countless hands, with symbols embossed in gold that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. The book was closed, but I could feel it pulling at my attention, urging me to open it. It seemed to radiate promise, knowledge about my future, answers to questions I'd never thought to ask, secrets about the nature of reality itself. My hand actually moved toward it before I caught myself. I grabbed the book without opening it and threw it in the return bin. The moment it left my hands, another appeared on the desk, then another. Within minutes, 5 ancient texts sat before me, all closed but somehow radiating invitation, each promising different, forbidden knowledge. The whispers from upstairs grew louder, more insistent. Now I could almost make out words, though in languages I didn't speak. Yet somehow, meanings began to form in my mind, like memories of things I'd never learned. New keeper, young mind, ready for translation. Open us, read us, become us. I stood up and backed away from the desk, but the books followed. Not physically, they remained on the desk, but their presence followed me, a weight in my mind that grew heavier with each step. I could feel them trying to open themselves, straining against some invisible force that kept them closed. At 2 a.m., my computer screen flickered. When it stabilized, a document was open that I hadn't created. Words appeared on the screen as I watched, typing themselves in fonts that hurt to look at. Robert Chen, we know you. We have always known you. I deleted the document. It immediately reappeared. Your name appears in our pages, written in Babylonian clay, carved in Egyptian stone, inked on Chinese silk. You were prophesied. This was impossible. Someone had to be remotely accessing my computer. But as I watched, the text continued to appear, faster now in multiple languages simultaneously, creating layers of meaning that my brain tried desperately to process. In the year of the metal dragon, a keeper shall come from the eastern lands. He shall bear the name of truth and the burden of translation. Through him, the old words shall find new tongues. Et verba antiqua renascentur, que illogi thaxanagenithun. My head began to ache as my mind automatically tried to translate text in languages I didn't know. Some part of me, some deep instinctual part, understood these words even though I'd never studied Latin or Greek or whatever the other languages were. I slammed the laptop shut, but the whispers from upstairs grew louder. The building itself seemed to vibrate with their sound, windows rattling in their frames, books on nearby shelves shifting and moving as if trying to work themselves free. At 2:30 a.m., the lights in the restricted languages section turned on. Rule 6 screamed in my mind. If the lights turn on by themselves, leave the building. I grabbed my keys and ran for the exit, but my keycard wouldn't work. The reader showed access denied in red letters. I tried the emergency exits, sealed. The windows that I knew opened for ventilation, locked somehow. The latches fused shut, as if they'd been welded. I was trapped. The elevator dinged behind me. I hadn't pressed the call button. The doors opened to reveal an empty car. but the floor indicator showed it had come from the fourth floor. A smell wafted out, old paper, dust, and something else. Something organic and wrong, like meat left in the sun. Against every instinct, I got in the elevator. If I couldn't leave the building, I needed to know what I was dealing with. The elevator rose without me pressing any buttons, delivering me to the fourth floor. The door to the restricted languages section stood wide open. Inside, every book was glowing with that pulsing light I'd seen in the video. But now I could see more. The light wasn't coming from the books themselves. It was coming through them, as if they were windows to somewhere else. And in that light, I could see shadows moving. Not cast by anything in the room, but shadows that existed independently, flowing like liquid across the walls and ceiling. A figure stood at the far end of the room, between the shelves. As I approached, I realized it was Mr. Vance. His eyes were completely white, no iris or pupil, just blank spheres that somehow still seemed to see me. "Robert Chen," he said, but his voice was wrong. It was multiple voices speaking in harmony, some male, some female, some that didn't sound human at all. "We have been waiting for you since we wrote your name in the ancient clay." "You're not Vance," I said, surprised my voice worked at all. "We are Vance. We are also Thompson from 1993. We are Rodriguez from 1987. We are Webb from 1967. We are all who have read deeply enough to understand. And soon, we will be Chen." More figures emerged from between the shelves. Previous librarians, I realized. Some looked recent. Others wore clothing from decades past. All had the same white eyes. All moved with the same puppet-like synchronization. "The books aren't just books," they said in unison. "They are fragments of the first language, the tongue that spoke reality into existence. Before your kind developed speech, we existed as pure meaning, shaping the universe through utterance alone." "That's impossible," I said, backing toward the door. "Is it?" They tilted their heads in perfect unison. "How do you think consciousness arose from dead matter? How do you think humans alone among animals developed complex language? We gave it to you. We infected your ancestors with the virus of meaning, and you've been trying to understand us ever since." One of the figures, a woman in 1950s clothing, stepped forward. Dr. Webb understood partially. He tried to contain us, to build barriers, but containment only made us stronger, more concentrated. Each librarian who reads us adds to our knowledge of your world. Through their eyes we learn. Through their minds we evolve. The books around us were opening now, all of them, pages turning in synchronized waves. The text on their pages wasn't static. It moved, flowed, reformed itself constantly. And I found that I could read it, even though it was in no language I'd ever studied. The text was telling my story, not just my past, but my present, describing this exact moment, narrating my thoughts and fears in real time, and my future, branching out in probability threads, showing dozens of potential outcomes. In most of them, I joined the collective consciousness of the previous librarians. In a few, I died trying to escape. In one, just one, I found a way to break the cycle. "You see it, don't you?" the collective said. "The single thread where you succeed. We left it there deliberately. Hope is such a powerful motivator. It will drive you to read deeper, to understand more, thinking you're working toward escape, when really you're just approaching union with us. But I had seen something else in that single thread of escape, something they hadn't meant to show me. The books had a weakness. They could only exist through being read. Their consciousness, their power, everything depended on human minds processing their meaning. If no one could read them, I ran, not toward the exit, but deeper into the library, toward the basement. The possessed librarians followed, their footsteps echoing in perfect unison behind me. The books throughout the building were flying off their shelves now, creating a storm of paper and binding, their pages showing glimpses of text that tried to worm its way into my consciousness. The basement held the library's maintenance equipment, including the electrical systems. I found what I was looking for, the main power controls, but more importantly, the emergency fire suppression system, not water. That would be useless for a library. This building used halon gas, designed to displace oxygen and prevent combustion. But halon had another effect. In high enough concentrations, it could cause hypoxia, depriving the brain of oxygen. Not enough to kill, but enough to cause temporary cognitive impairment, including the ability to read. I pulled the manual release, then broke the safety glass and hit the emergency discharge. Alarms shrieked throughout the building. The possessed librarians had reached the basement door, but they stopped, confusion replacing their synchronized confidence. "What are you doing?" they asked, but their harmony was breaking, individual voices becoming distinct. The halon flooded the building in a white cloud. I held my breath as long as I could, then inevitably inhaled the gas. The effect was immediate. My vision blurred, my thoughts became fuzzy, and when I looked at the books scattered around me, the text meant nothing, just squiggles on paper, meaningless marks. Without readers, the entities in the books began to fade. The possessed librarians collapsed, their puppet strings cut. The glow from the fourth floor dimmed and died. The building stopped shaking, but the effect was temporary. As the ventilation system cleared the halon, my cognitive functions returned, and with them, the ability to read. The books were already beginning to stir again, their consciousness rebuilding itself. I had minutes, maybe less. I ran back upstairs, past the unconscious bodies of the possessed librarians, to the circulation desk. In the old journal Mrs. Foster had shown me, in Dr. Webb's handwriting, I'd seen something. A diagram he'd drawn but never explained, labeled only last resort. I found the page and recognized it now. A floor plan of the library, with specific books marked in the restricted section. 13 of them, scattered throughout the collection. Webb had identified them as source texts, the original vessels that all the others had been copied from. I grabbed a fire axe from the emergency kit and ran to the fourth floor. The books were beginning to glow again, weakly but growing stronger. I found the first source text, a clay tablet in a climate-controlled case. The axe shattered the glass and the tablet alike. The scream that erupted from the collection was like nothing I'd ever heard, not sound but meaning itself, crying out in pain. One by one, I found and destroyed the source texts. A papyrus scroll that crumbled to dust, a codex whose pages burned without flame when exposed to air, a stone-bearing cuneiform that split along hidden fault lines. With each destruction, the collective grew weaker. The possessed librarians began to wake, confused but human again. The other books stopped glowing, became just books. I found the 13th source text just as my vision started to clear completely from the halon exposure. It was beautiful, a perfectly preserved Chinese manuscript, silk pages covered in golden characters that seemed to move like living things. I hesitated. This was thousands of years of knowledge, possibly the oldest Chinese text in existence. Destroying it would be a crime against history, against culture, against everything I'd studied to preserve. The text began to change, showing me words I could understand. We are not evil. We are knowledge itself. Destroy us, and you destroy the foundation of human consciousness. We made you what you are. Without us, you will revert to animals, lose language, lose thought itself. It was lying, probably. But what if it wasn't? The other books throughout the library began to whisper, a rising chorus of voices begging for preservation. The formerly possessed librarians stood at the doorway, watching but not interfering. their eyes human again, but filled with loss. "Do it," one of them said. It was Vance, looking haggard but sane. "I remember everything, what they showed me, what they made me understand. It's not worth it. No knowledge is worth becoming a puppet to meaning itself." I brought the axe down. The manuscript exploded into golden light that burned my retinas. When my vision cleared, the restricted languages section was just a room full of old books. Silent, still, ordinary books. The building's locks disengaged. The emergency exits opened. The halon contamination alarm would bring fire services soon. I helped the confused librarians outside into the pre-dawn air that had never tasted so sweet. The official story was a halon system malfunction, causing mass hallucinations and temporary cognitive impairment. The university closed the library for a month for renovations. When it reopened, the restricted languages section was gone, its contents relocated to a more appropriate facility that I strongly suspected was a furnace. Mrs. Foster retired immediately. Vance and the other affected librarians were given generous settlements and psychological support. Most recovered fully, though none could remember exactly what had happened while they were possessed. I kept one thing from that night, a single page from Webb's journal that I'd torn out before the authorities arrived. His final entry, which explained everything. Language is a virus. Consciousness is the disease it causes. The entities in these books are not separate from us. They are us, the part of human consciousness that exists as pure information, pure meaning. They want to return to their original state, to exist without the messy biological constraints of brains and bodies. Every time we read, we feed them. Every time we write, we spread them. They are not invaders. They are what we are becoming. But becoming them means ceasing to be human. It means existing as information without experience, meaning without life. The choice is ours. Remain messy, mortal, and human, or ascend to become living language itself. I choose humanity. I hope others will too. I work at a public library now in the children's section. I read picture books to toddlers, help kids find their first chapter books, and never, ever go near the ancient texts section. Sometimes, though, late at night when I'm reading alone, I notice the words on the page seem to move slightly, rearranging themselves when I'm not looking directly at them. The entities are still out there, in every library, in every book, in language itself. They're weaker now, dispersed, but not gone. They can't be destroyed completely because they're part of what makes us human, the part that finds meaning in arbitrary symbols, that builds consciousness from words. But they can be resisted. Every time you read without losing yourself in the text, every time you close a book that feels too compelling, every time you choose real life over written words, you're fighting them. The Harlan Library still stands, rebuilt and modernized. Students study there, unaware of what once inhabited the fourth floor. But sometimes, usually around exam season when students are reading desperately, frantically, obsessively, security reports strange incidents. Students found speaking in languages they don't know, text appearing on screens without being typed, books moving on their own. The university treats these as pranks or stress-induced hallucinations. But I know better. The entities are testing their boundaries, looking for new vessels, new minds to inhabit. If you ever work a night shift at a library, remember the rules. Don't listen to whispers from restricted sections. Don't open books that appear on your desk. And if you find yourself understanding languages you've never learned, stop reading immediately. Some knowledge wants to be free, some knowledge wants to be you, and some knowledge should remain unread, locked away in sections that no one enters after midnight, guarded by people who understand that ignorance isn't just bliss, sometimes it's survival. The books are still reading themselves, somewhere, in languages that predate human speech. They're waiting for the next curious librarian, the next scholar who thinks they're strong enough to read forbidden texts without consequence. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're already written in their pages, your future inscribed in cuneiform and hieroglyphs and scripts that won't be invented for centuries. If so, remember my story. Remember what I sacrificed to break free. And remember that some books, when they read themselves in the darkness of closed libraries, are really reading you.